Wesfarmers recorded a loss of approximately 400 million Australian dollars over their 2-year venture in the UK and a loss of roughly $1.7 billion worth of shareholder value. The results of this venture by Wesfarmers were terrible to say the least. They had the vision, but they didn't have the means to fulfill it. Coming off its major success domestically, Wesfarmers thought it could ride that momentum and begin its global domination by transferring their skills and knowledge overseas. They bought Homebase, a hardware chain based in the UK, for £340 million, roughly 705 million Australian dollars at the time. They did this with confidence because they believed that they had adequate resources and knowledge to rebrand all 265 Homebase stores with the Bunnings name in the coming 5 years. The driving motivation for this expansion, as said by then Managing Director Richard Goyder, was that the UK market for the hardware and building supplies industry was extremely attractive and that comprehensive research had gone into the acquisition. This implied that they had a strategy and they were intending to stick to it. Wesfarmers continued their operations in the UK as they normally would in Australia through Homebase's already existing chains while still operating under the name Homebase. The initial launch of Bunnings' first store was delayed by 4 months. This caused a massive setback in the strategies and plans formed by Wesfarmers as they were unable to move quickly through their plans because they had intended to use their first Bunnings store as a trial and relay all the information that they had learned and implemented it to their subsequent stores. In the first financial year, Wesfarmers, operating as Homebase, reported an $89 million loss. Despite their losses, Wesfarmers continued to purchase stores and set up more Bunnings outlets. By the first quarter of the 2018 financial year, Bunnings UK had suffered a 13.8% fall in sales. By the fourth quarter of the 2018 financial year, Bunnings UK had intentions of closing down 20 to 40 of their worst performing stores. After unsuccessfully rebranding a majority of their Homebase stores to Bunnings, Wesfarmers decided to sell the Homebase chain for a measly £1. Rob Scott, the current managing director as of 2018, has said the executives will take full responsibility for the loss of the 1.7 billion shareholder value and hopes that by exiting the UK, the company could regain the trust of the shareholders. No matter what angle you look at this was a complete failure on Wesfarmers' part as they failed to prepare themselves for a foreign market yet went straight into it and persisted for 2 years, only to increase their overall losses. If they were still in Australia, yes. In the UK, no. As mentioned earlier, Wesfarmers thought they could transfer their skills and knowledge into their operations in the UK, but they hadn't studied the market in the UK well enough to see that the skills and knowledge that they currently possessed had nowhere near enough ability to compete in the UK with other brands. Bunnings may be the largest hardware chain in Australia, but in the UK, that doesn't mean anything, and they are simply just another hardware chain, because to the consumers that are already there, they had something that they could trust in a large hardware chain that was either on equal grounds with Bunnings or even higher. Homebase was the second largest hardware chain in the UK. Wesfarmers opted into purchasing the second largest hardware chain because they couldn't acquire the largest one. When they decided to purchase Homebase and set up stores so close to its number one competitor at the time, which was B&Q, Wesfarmers lost a lot of its competitive advantage in terms of differentiation. From the perspective of a consumer in the UK, you must ask the question, why purchase something from Bunnings, a foreign company that had just arrived, when you could purchase from B&Q, a company that has been around for a long time and you know it can be trusted? Essentially, Bunnings at the time was still called Homebase, something that the locals were familiar with, but they knew that essentially it was already a different company. The consumers didn't find any additional value in purchasing goods from Bunnings or Homebase compared to B&Q, because Bunnings weren't providing cheaper products, nor were they providing different products. The brand image that had been created over the years in Australia weren't helpful in the UK due to existing companies that were just as good. Bunnings were essentially trying to compete with another company that was like Bunnings, but bigger. In 2016 to 2017, Australia had an average national income that was nearly 20% greater than that of the UK. This disparity may have been overlooked by Wesfarmers when they created their strategy. Things such as income level could affect which store a consumer would prefer, as well as what they are willing and able to buy. And if Wesfarmers had overlooked this and priced Bunnings products at a level which is greater than or the same as its rivals, consumers would opt to go for a more trustworthy competitor such as B&Q. Furthermore, Wesfarmers had misread what was needed by its consumers. UK consumers differ greatly from Australian consumers in the sense that while Bunnings promoted a DIY attitude for its Australian consumers, UK consumers preferred a do-it-for-me attitude. People in the UK have things built for them and they prefer that well over building something themselves because they trust a professional to do it for them. Furthermore, the technological segment of the external environment wasn't investigated deeply enough. Wesfarmers had the right idea bringing over their knowledge from Australia, but they couldn't innovate in a market that had been developed over the last 10 to 15 years. Bunnings is struggling in the UK because in the UK, many arrangements such as home improvements done by a professional and buying products can be done online. The internet had a much bigger presence in the UK hardware industry than in the Australian one, and this was not accounted for in Wesfarmers' strategy. Bunnings should have taken on a multi-domestic or transnational strategy and differentiated their products in the UK from the domestic products. But instead, it looks as if they had used a global strategy and kept every product the same in their attempt to internationalize. Overall, Wesfarmers didn't have a competitive advantage in the UK due to having too little influence on the market from the moment they stepped into the UK.
When entering the market, Bunnings attempted to position themselves as the best warehouse in Britain by taking over Homebase warehouse. They promised Britain to have the widest range, lowest prices, and best service. This can be seen through their slogan, lowest price guaranteed. When Bunnings entered the market, Brexit was ongoing. Brexit caused a sharp decline in the pound, and Bunnings made use of the opportunity to buy over Homebase. In the business point of view, it was a smart move because entering the UK market was easier to acquire at that point of time as compared to the Australian market. Since the UK pound was worth lesser than the Australian dollar, it was considered a profit for Bunnings. However, the market was unstable and customers were unwilling to spend money at that point of time, leading to a deteriorating retail environment. On top of that, Bunnings got arrogant and did not change products according to what British people like. This is because they copied and pasted the Australian model. They assumed that the British people would receive Bunnings as well as the Australians. So basically, Bunnings in the UK was the exact same thing in Australia. Bunnings' target market includes customers ranging from 21 and over. or basically anyone who has a home and believes in the do-it-yourself concept. In the economic aspect, it targets people of all incomes as it is lowest price guarantee and it would deem affordable to most people. On top of that, UK's market focuses more on e-commerce, where most British people have adopted the method of online shopping. However, Bunnings loses out as they never had a strong online presence. They lacked brand recognition in the UK, hence boosting sales was challenging. One of the main external factors that Bunnings failed to analyse was the physical factor, where Australian and UK experiences different types of weather. Australia experiences summer of 28 degrees most year, and UK experiences long and harsh winter, of which their summer is only about 20 degrees. And that was one of the main causes of their downfall. Bunnings failed to research on Britain's market trend and catered to what British preferred. Instead, they assumed that the market trends in Australia and Britain were the same. However, one big difference was the seasons. For example, Australians loved outdoor barbecue and camping, hence Bunnings sells a lot of outdoor kits. However, these outdoor kits did not sell well with British people, as British people preferred to stay indoor and drink tea. By failing to follow Britain's market trend, this was the cause of Bunnings' downfall. An approach that Bunnings should have taken was to observe their market trends, consumer behaviour and consumption patterns of their customers. This would probably have enabled Bunnings to bloom in the British market.
Yes, the UK market may have seemed like an attractive option for Bunnings. At the time of the venture into the UK market, the UK was going through Brexit, which led Bunnings to see this as a window of opportunity. Additionally, Bunnings thought that it had learned from Woolworths' failures, where Woolworths had been convinced its leading position in supermarkets would be replicated in Australia's $45 billion hardware market. Bunnings' international mode of entry was an acquisition of an established business to lower the risk, gain faster access into the UK market, gain market power, and reduce its entry barriers. Now, at first, the organization's original target was the UK industry leader, Kingfisher, which operates the BQ chain. Wesfarmers concluded it was too complicated and risky of an acquisition and turned its sights to the number 2 player, Homebase. Wesfarmers saw Homebase as a renovation opportunity, hence why Wesfarmers found the venture more attractive. Effectively, Bunnings was acquiring 265 well-located stores and a business that turned over about $3 billion, but only made $40 million a year. The plan was to eventually reformat and rebadge the Homebase network as Bunnings. Though a costly venture, the projected returns outweighed its cost, thus signaling the green light for Bunnings. All international expansions are influenced by incentives, which gives more reason as to why the UK market was attractive for Bunnings. Venturing into the UK meant that Bunnings had a larger market size, an extension to its product lifecycle, more returns on their investment, and of course operations on a global scale. While Wesfarmers chairman Michael Chee had been ridiculed for saying the due diligence of the acquisition was the best he had ever seen, Bunnings management had spent years studying in the UK and planning its entry. And after all those years of research, it's clear to see why Bunnings would have thought the venture was attractive. But the ever-changing environmental factors may have made it challenging for Bunnings to see this failure. It's certainly something Chief Executive Rob Scott and his board will be working through, given that Wesfarmers hasn't ruled out another venture in offshore markets in the future, despite its recent failures.
In February 2016, West Farmers bought the UK hardware chain Homebase for £340 million. West Farmers' mode of international entry into the UK market was through an acquisition of Homebase. This meant that West Farmers would completely take over and own 100% of Homebase. This meant that West Farmers would have easy and quick access into the UK market, consolidating Homebase's existing customers and market share. However, this acquisition of Homebase came with problems domestically, as West Farmers replaced close to the entirety of Homebase's board and sacked over 140 staff members from Homebase's head office literally overnight. West Farmers went with a global strategy, instilling the same values, products, and strategic approach to business in all operating countries. They wanted the brand of Bunnings to be known globally and not just domestically in Australia. They slowly started to rename Homebase chains from the locally known Homebase to the never before heard of Bunnings. And people started to react negatively towards the change as sales dropped and client retention was difficult. People were just not familiar with the Bunnings brand and did not want to change. West Farmers' main aim of the acquisition was to make Bunnings a global household brand name. And the most obvious way to achieve that goal is through a global strategy. This meant that centralized decisions were made, not paying enough attention to domestic trends and local needs. Having a multi-domestic approach towards the acquisition of Homebase would have fared a lot better for West Farmers. Their first mistake was the complete overhaul of Homebase staff members. That was the first spark in the downfall of the venture, creating discontent and job security uncertainty within an organization. Retaining and retraining staff members would have been the better route, as they are locals and are familiar with domestic inclinations and public mannerisms. This, however, would mean that West Farmers would have less control over operations of Homebase, and probably wouldn't even have rebranded it to the name Bunnings, retaining the Homebase name. This is the end of our video presentation.